As we mentioned earlier, the death toll from yesterday's residential building collapse now stands at 4, with 159 people still unaccounted for. Rescue workers have been working throughout the night and day, sifting through the rubble to try and find any survivors that may still be there. New details are surfacing about the land that the complex sits on, while engineers are on site trying to figure out what happened. David Begnaud reports.
Let me set the scene for you. So we are about 100 yards from where the building collapsed. We are on the front portion of the building. The backside facing the beach is where it partially collapsed. It smells like a fire, and there have been little small fires burning here at the building. In fact, on the side of the building behind me over my shoulder, firefighters have constantly been blasting water at one particular side that continues to smolder. Overnight rescue crews, humans, dogs, constantly going through the rubble looking for people. This is still a very active search and rescue operation. We've spent the last 24 hours trying to get information about the building, what was going on here, what complaints had been filed here. We're going to tell you more about that in a moment, but I want to start with some incredibly dramatic video of first responders at the scene. Risking their own lives, Miami-Dade County Fire Department's technical rescue team went underneath the building to try and find victims who may still be alive.
This process is slow and methodical. You see that every time there's a shift in the rubble, we have additional rubble that shifts on us.
When the building collapsed early Thursday morning, this is what one of the first responders radioed in.
I see many people on the balconies. The building is gone. There's no elevators. This is nothing. I mean, it almost resembles a trade center.
At the time of the collapse, the 12-story, 136-unit building, which is 40 years old, was undergoing a routine inspection. Here in Miami-Dade County, buildings have to be recertified after 40 years, and then every 10 years after that.
To my knowledge,
Ken Director is an attorney who represents the Champlain Towers South Condominium Association.
I was told that it looked like the garage fell into a hole.
Director says there are thousands of porous concrete beachside buildings that are subjected to seawater damage, which can weaken the structure. Inspectors here determined that before the collapse, the condo needed some routine concrete repair.
The engineer who did that found nothing to suggest that a collapse like this was imminent.
There is an expert on the earth and environment at Florida International University who found that this area where the building partially collapsed showed signs of sinking back in the 1990s, otherwise known as subsidence.
The subsidence rate was between 1 and 3 millimeters per year, which is pretty small. It accumulates over time, then it can be a few inches over decades, and that was our concern.
The professor cautions the sinking alone is not enough to cause the building to collapse. As for the 40-year plan to assess the building and do construction, we're told that the work being done on the building was happening on the rooftop. That's where they were focusing their improvements at the time the building collapsed. Vlad and Anne-Marie.
All right, David, thank you. Jim DeFede is here to discuss. He's an investigative reporter for our Miami station. Thank you so much for joining us, Jim. So, we heard David Begnaud's package, but there was an earlier press conference at around 8:15 this morning. What additional information did we get from that?
Well, the two big bullet items out of that was that the death toll has now climbed to 4. They recovered 3 bodies overnight. But more importantly, the number of unaccounted for rose from 99 to 159, a fairly dramatic leap. When I inquired separately as to why that number had risen so sharply, it's that they are just now beginning to fully understand who was in the building, because families are now coming forward and saying, my grandmother was there, my sister was there, and they're starting to be able to compile a more fuller list, because there was no real master list of who was staying inside that building on Wednesday night. So now they have a better idea, and with 159 individuals missing, the chances of recovery of some of those folks is growing more and more dim.
So we now know that there are at least 4 dead. Do we know anything more about what officials are saying about the death toll?
Well, while we are still very much in the recovery or the rescue aspect of it, they are trying to still work under the assumption that there may be people trapped in some sort of crevices that they may be able to try to find. every source of mine that I've spoken to at the site tells me that they are bracing, and the community should be braced for something significant in terms of the numbers rising. I think, quite honestly, we need to start rethinking about this accident, not in the sense of a typical sort of collapse of a structure, but more almost like an airplane crash. That this is going to become the equivalent of like a 747 crashing into the ground in terms of the number of lives that are likely to be lost. And so I think when you start thinking of it in those terms, you realize the scope of it. And one sign of that is that at the Family Reunification Center, one of the things that they're doing with the FBI's assistance is they're taking DNA samples from families, because they know that once they start recovering the remains, that it's going to be hard to identify. And then also, I've spoken to officials with the medical examiner's office. You know, they are bracing for a very long haul, like days and days of bodies coming out of there and having to be identified. Matter of fact, one source told me recently that they're getting ready to bring in, portable medical examiner units and refrigerator trucks to the scene probably later today or tomorrow.
Yeah, those are, they're very sobering points. I know at the press conference this morning, and maybe this is how it always works, but, we heard that, that the homicide detectives are working with the medical examiner's office, and it sort of struck me when I heard homicide, even though these are not, this is not a natural occurrence, but the homicide detectives bringing all of their knowledge to try and find a conclusion as to why these people died. It really sort of struck me. And I want to get into what we know about possible causes, but let me talk about some of the kind of newer developments first when it comes to the search and rescue operation. FEMA is on the ground. What role will FEMA play? How are they, adding to this effort?
So this is actually quite remarkable. The fact that the President of the United States signed an emergency declaration for what is ultimately a local event is quite sobering. This is not something that's typical. I talked to one emergency manager who likened it to Oklahoma City and the World Trade Center in terms of the scope and scale of this. And what the FEMA declaration is able to do, and the Federal Emergency Declaration, is it brings additional resources. Look, Miami-Dade is very fortunate in the sense that they have right here in South Florida at least 3 of the elite urban search and rescue teams that are often brought in. If this incident had occurred, for instance, in Haiti, the urban search and rescue team from Miami would have been the ones loaded up on C-130s and flown to Haiti or to Mexico or to wherever in Latin America. That's what they typically do. So the fact that they could be here means that we've got the very best teams available. So they have that part covered. But there is going to be a lot to deal with. In terms of expense, that structure is going to eventually have to all be torn down. All of the possessions that those people have in those buildings are all lost and gone. There's going to be need for costs for funerals, for all sorts of things. So in a way, what this does is it also opens up the federal checkbook and the state to be able to help provide a backstop. There are things that the local officials need in terms of support, for additional crews to come in for relief efforts. But really what it does is it signifies the significance of just how bad the situation is. And with 159 people unaccounted for, it's a sobering and jarring number that I'm told caught the president's attention and why he made the declaration he did.
Yeah, Jim, one of the things that we heard the mayor of Surfside saying in numerous interviews is that, an image like the one that we've been showing and that folks here in the United States and around the world have been seeing of this building that has collapsed is not something that you would typically expect to see in the United States of America. You mentioned Haiti. You're right. I was there when those crews from Florida, from Los Angeles, from New York City showed up to try and rescue survivors, some of whom were pulled out, I was saying to Anne-Marie earlier, 3, 4, 5, even 6 days after their homes or places of business had collapsed. The question, and I know know that we are still in a situation where we want to be sensitive to the family members who are waiting to hear word of their loved ones. But I know that for many, yourself and others, investigative reporters, that there is reporting underway to try and understand the history of this building. I've seen a couple of structural engineers who have given interviews at various networks and in newspapers suggesting that part of the reason why we see the front-facing the section of the building that is collapsed, which is closest or facing the ocean, versus the section of the building that is not, could also have something to do with it. One engineer speculated that the piles, and I'm not an engineer, but the piles or the structures, the columns that hold the building up are what crumbled, and they can tell just by looking at the way that the building collapsed that it was a failure of those columns, and it may have to do with either the land or with the ocean. The question I have then, as somebody who's not from Florida, is aren't most buildings in that area, in the Miami area, built with the understanding that there is a corrosive saltwater effect that can have a detrimental effect on buildings there?
It is, and you're absolutely right. And we're all going to become experts, those of us who are going to cover this story, in concrete and the tensile strength and all those sorts of things that are related to it. So look, it's, as you said, it's the very early stages of the investigation in terms of what happened. It's probably going to be months and months before. Miami-Dade Police Department, the Miami-Dade Homicide Unit, as you noted, is taking the lead. They will bring in technical engineers who will assist them in understanding exactly why this building failed. You know, David Begnaud had a very good report just a moment ago. While there was some work being done on the roof, by and large, the people I've spoken to, both on the scene and around it and related to it, say that whatever failed from underneath this building. And so, yes, the attorney for the condo association who you interviewed just a few moments ago in David's piece told me as well that when representatives of the building went in after the collapse and were in the garage area, they could see a large hole had formed underneath the garage, which again suggests that you have saltwater intrusion potentially. To your point, is this expected? Is this understood? Is this something that could happen to other buildings? In Miami-Dade County, they require a 40-year recertification of buildings. This building was built in 1981. So here in 2021, they were in the midst of that 40-year recertification process. And what that means is they've had inspectors throughout that building for the last few months. They had identified certain repairs that were needed and that contractors were in the process of being hired to make those repairs. I asked the attorney for the association if any of the repairs that have been identified were significant enough to have caused this damage, and he said no. But as you know, if you think about it in terms of once you begin repairs on a structure, you often find more and more issues. And I think that what you were referring to with regard to the pilings that go in that the building is based on, yes, that is something that they are going to be looking closely to, because let's remember Miami Beach and Surfside, it's a sandbar, it's built on marshland. It was not supposed to really have structures on it, and yet man decided that this is where hotels and everyone wanted to stay because they could be on the beach. And so the attorney in my conversation with him wondered if this is not a harbinger of concern for other potential failures and whether or not communities such as these that we see on the beach need closer inspections, maybe more often than 40 years. So I think saltwater intrusion is going to play a major role. Saltwater gets into the concrete. 40-year-old concrete is more porous than concrete they use today is. That's what I've come to learn. And that salt water gets into the concrete, dries out. The salt then eats away at the rebar and the metal structure within the concrete. That weakens, and that could have been one of the reasons. Again, very early, but we're going to learn a lot more about how these buildings are built. and more importantly, what lessons to take from this disaster going forward.
You know, Jim, it's so interesting what you're saying there, because I recall, Anne-Marie and you will as well, that one of the storylines when we were covering the hurricanes, specifically as it relates to Houston 2 years ago, was exactly similar to what you're talking about, Jim, that there is land that has been developed that was never really meant to be developed, and when Mother Nature comes knocking, no matter what you do, eventually there will be a price to pay because of where we are right now with climate science. So that's another discussion. But I also, Jim, in talking about the inspection that was happening at the building, you know, just so our viewers understand who are not from the Miami area, the Florida area, I understand that there are some very, very strict zoning and building laws in effect in that part of the state. It's some of the strictest in the country because of some of the things that we're talking about right now. So I just want people to understand, as much as you know, that it's not because there is any lax regulation or regulations have been loosened in recent years, that in fact it's really, really tough to build high rises in Miami.
You're absolutely correct with regard to that. So, everything changes based on the last catastrophe. So the major cataclysmic event that had previously occurred was Hurricane Andrew down here back in the 1990s. As a result of that, we realized that the building codes in South Florida were horrendous in terms of they had been weakened, they had been compromised, and so they then passed what became the strongest building codes anywhere in the country. So the codes for these buildings are great when it comes to wind. We're now learning if this is truly a tragedy that took place because of saltwater intrusion and what was occurring underneath the buildings, we may see new laws as it relates to that. But you're absolutely correct that we're always sort of like one catastrophe behind in terms of as we look at this. And the 40-year inspection that was going on, that came about as well because of concerns that some of these older buildings were not being inspected close enough. Really, in the scheme of things, a 40-year-old building is not incredibly old. I mean, whether you're in New York or other places, 100-year-old buildings are not uncommon. This was just a 40-year-old building, and it was going through that recertification process, which is required down here. Also, to your point about high rises, you'll happen to see that right next to this building is a building that's a newer building that's much higher. Well, that's the line between Miami Beach and Surfside. And in Miami Beach, you can build buildings higher than 12 stories. Surfside limits the height of their buildings to just 12 stories. So, just a difference. So that right there is a difference that I'm sure will be looked at going forward. But just to circle back once more, I think one of the long-term lessons is we're going to have to start looking at some of these older buildings. And when I say older, 30, 40-year-old buildings, 50-year-old buildings, to understand what's going on underneath them as much as well you understand what they are in terms of wind resistance if a hurricane comes in.
I tell you, Jim, that was really informative. Man, I know if I lived there, and I think this building has sort of a sister building too, if I lived there, I would be demanding to see some sort of records to find out just how safe things are. Mm-hmm. It's got to be unnerving for, everyone else too who lives in that neighborhood. Jim DeFede, thank you so much.
Anytime.